Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Smarter News and a special broadcast I could not be more excited for. I know we have navigated a lot of unprecedented historic moments together as a news organization, and we have another one in front of us today, which is the first ever medical evacuation from the International Space Station. And this news kind of came across kind of abruptly at the end of last week. And now the astronauts are actually coming back, the ones that are the focus of this, which we'll get to. We don't know exactly who that is. They're actually coming back today. So it's Wednesday. They're going to be coming back to Earth. They're going to be landing expected on Thursday morning in California. And that's about all we know. But there's a lot here to this story, and there's a lot going on in space. I know there's a lot going on Earth too, don't worry. But there's a lot happening in space, and it is one of the biggest stories of the year and something that we cannot lose sight of. And it's such a great opportunity to talk to a friend of mine who's an amazing space journalist. She's had an incredible career. Her name is Kristen Fisher. She is the founder of the Endless Void Studio. She also has an amazing, quickly growing, very respected YouTube channel, The Endless Void. So if you're curious about all sorts of things, including aliens, which we will talk to Kristen about today because everything's
on the table.
That's right. We're like, did the aliens do this, Kristen? I was even expecting to ask that question, but maybe we should. Kristen, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so exciting to have you.
Jenna, thank you so much for having me. You have been such an inspiration to me as I embark on my own independent journalism life, the post Fox News, post CNN life. And it's just so nice to get to chat with you and have an hour or however long we want to talk. I mean, what a luxury. I remember tossing to you in a studio 90 seconds wrap, I mean, you're not saying this, but so.
Well, no, and this is actually good. It's important to mention all the things that you have done in your journalism career. You also were a White House correspondent. So you weren't just focused on space, but you found your way back here. And I want to talk to you about your family background as well. You have two parents, both astronauts. So it's in your blood, this work. And now you are a pioneer of your own in a different way here. And I could not be more excited for you. It is true. We used to talk. I did text Kristen and say, hey, Kristen, you want to do a live broadcast with me like old times? But there's no commercials. We could just keep talking. No one is telling us what we have to do. It is a feeling of freedom. And it is nice not to have that rap in your ear when someone tells you got to stop talking.
It honestly never gets old, Jenna. I still get such a kick out of it that we can do this.
It's absolutely true. Well, okay, so let's get to the news. I'm just curious from your perspective. We have a lot of ground to cover here, but from your perspective, were you anticipating this announcement? I know you have a lot of great sources. Were there murmurs of anything going on? No. So tell us you get called to NASA for a press conference. Walk us through what happened last week and how this all came about.
So first, I just think it's really important to put this in perspective in the sense that the International Space Station has been orbiting the Earth, and there have been people living and working on board the International Space Station continuously for over 25 years. And there has never been a medical situation like this. There has never been a medical evacuation like what we're about to see today. And so I think it's almost more surprising that this hasn't happened before in over 25 years. Everybody has trained for this, prepared for this. Like you knew at some point this moment would come, but it's still a huge deal that this is the first time. So to answer your original question, I'd heard no murmurs. I heard nothing about this. My mom, who's a former NASA astronaut and a close friend of the current commander aboard the International Space Station, who's coming home today, Mike Fink, she didn't know anything about it. And I first heard about it and learned about it from NASA. NASA put it out. They said they were supposed to be a spacewalk. And so everybody was kind of watching the feeds for, when this spacewalk was going to take place. And shortly before it was supposed to happen, NASA called off the spacewalk, and they said it was due to a medical issue involving one of the astronauts. We didn't know which astronaut. We didn't know what the medical issue was. We didn't know if it was because of some of the preparations that they were doing to get ready for this spacewalk. Nothing. We just know that they had called it off for some sort of medical issue, which has happened before.
So it didn't raise it didn't raise like immediate like alarm bells.
It didn't. That was like, like but it had happened before. So it was like, astronauts get sick. Like sometimes you just get a cold, and like you're not gonna if you have a if you have a really runny nose, like a snotty nose, or
which we're all familiar with as moms. Yes. Instant image. Yes.
When you have a helmet on, you can't like wipe your nose or things like that. So it could just be something super minor. But then it was about midnight, I think 1 a.m., that NASA sent out another press release. And they were like, hey, this is more serious than we originally thought, to the point where we're now considering an early return to Earth of this crew. And that we'd never heard before. And so I'd say it was about, midnight after we got the first murmur that it was like, okay, this is something serious.
So you asked a question. So there's a press conference
Right.
it's called. So when did you get that note? And you live in the DC area.
I do.
Right. So how did what happened there?
This was one of those like great DC moments, right? Got an email probably 2 p.m. saying that there was going to be a press conference at NASA's headquarters, which is like 20 minutes from my house. And Jared Isaacman, the new NASA administrator, was going to be holding his first press conference of his tenure in less than 2 hours. And I was like, and it was going to be about this crew and this astronaut that had some sort of severe, serious medical condition. So I'm like looking at my watch. I'm like, oh man, like, should I go? Should I try to, I had other things planned. Like, should I cancel that and go? And I decide to go. And so I just stop what I'm doing, get ready, head down there. I'm almost late. I walk in like 2 minutes before the press conference starts. And I'm literally the only member of the press there in person, except for one other, it was a journalist from, I believe, Chinese television. But that was it. It was an empty auditorium in terms of media presence there in the room, except for me and this one Chinese journalist. Everybody else, all the other, the normal space journalism press corps had called in on the phone bridge. But just that scene, I was like, am I in the right place?
Didn't seem to kind of match the moment, because you would expect, this is interesting. There's multiple reasons to show up the first time that we're going to see this administrator in this sort of format. And then also we have this sort of strange event that we're going to learn a little bit more about. So and this was also a proud mom moment, if you will, for me, when they do a little presentation. I'm going to play a little sound from that. And they tell, they kind of set the stage. This is what's going on. We're going to have the astronauts they're going to be leaving, but they were very careful to say that it's not an emergency. And Dr. Polk, who is not someone that I've seen before, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Dr. James Polk. He's what I guess would be his full title is the Chief Health and Medical Officer of NASA. Here's one of the things that he had to say, just so our audience can hear a little bit about how they're discussing this situation.
Sure.
Again, because the astronaut is absolutely stable, this is not an emergent evacuation. We're not immediately disembarking and getting the astronaut down. But it leaves that lingering risk and lingering question as to what that diagnosis is. And that means there's some lingering risk for that astronaut on board. And so always we err on the side of the astronaut's health and welfare. And in this particular case, we are doing the same.
Okay. So in the way that he talks, by the way, like, Dr. Polk, tell us more. He's very, very calm.
Very soothing.
This is what's happening. It's not emergent, but we are taking them away from the International Space Station early. You had the very first question.
Yeah.
This was my proud mom moment, because they say the first question often goes to a prominent journalist. And I love that it was Kristen Fisher of The Endless Void. And it was your question. It was very interesting to me. What did you ask and why did you ask it?
Well, my question was, and you have to be careful about how you phrase things, right? And you know this, Jenna, because you want to get a good answer, but you're also aware of the fact that, like, I can't just ask, well, which astronaut was it and what's wrong with them? Then you're never going to get a straight answer. So the way I framed it was, it is well known that the preparations for a spacewalk can be quite strenuous on the human body. And the reason that is, you think of it like when you're going scuba diving, and as a diver, you want to make sure that you don't when you're rising back to the surface, you don't get the bends, right? It's the same thing when you're going to do a spacewalk. You have to purge the nitrogen from your body so you don't get those bubbles. And just that process, the various things that happen in your body when you're doing that over a sustained period of time, or if you're doing some light exercise to get some of that nitrogen out, can be a strenuous time on an astronaut's body. And so like if you're walking on the treadmill, if you have a heart issue, it would likely pop up during that time. Or, the suits themselves are incredibly heavy, difficult. They're their own little spaceships, essentially. And so, sometimes astronauts have experienced pinched nerves or some sort of like physical ailment that is brought on by putting on a really heavy spacesuit that's difficult to move in. And so I knew that this happened, that this news was announced, that this medical condition was discovered as they were preparing for a spacewalk. And so I thought it was, very likely that this medical condition came about because of those preparations. So that was the question I asked. I asked them to shed some light on the strenuous nature of the preps that go into a spacewalk. And then I asked if they could specifically say if that is what contributed or triggered this astronaut specific medical condition. And the doctor said no. I was sure that was the reason, but he said no. And he said it had nothing to do with any other operational issues. So Jenna, we can get into all the things that it could be then, but my first guess was this was because of the spacewalk, and it, according to Dr. Polk, it was not.
So I didn't know anything about that. I didn't even dawn on me to think about what could happen going into a spacewalk. I just figured you put on your suit and you get ready to go outside. I don't really think about all the different stages that have to happen to make that a success. So that was that. Your question was very enlightening because I wouldn't even know to ask that question about the preliminary stages, getting ready. Wait a minute, something surfaces. So, and I don't mean to not give a lot to our audience. The truth is that we just don't know. We know the 4 astronauts that are coming home. We have a picture of them on the screen now. They include a Russian, Japanese astronaut, and we also have 2 of our own. Is it Zena or Zena?
Zena Cardman and Mike
Fink, who you said your mom is familiar with, who's has an amazing career. I mean, all of them have amazing careers.
They used to be, my mom and Mike Fink used to be office mates. We used to go water skiing with him when I was a kid.
So did he have any medical situations while water skiing that we should know about, Kristen? I feel like
my mom just sent me a photo of him. I really hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. We're all in our swimsuits. We're on a boat. And so he's like, this is like, I'm 10 years old, right? So a long time ago, 30 years ago. And so 30 years ago for Mike, and he's shirtless, right? And he is like a specimen of perfect health. So
which you have to be.
By the way, you have to be an astronaut. So he was in perfect physical shape back then from the appearance of this photo. And you have to be in great shape. The amount of tests and checks that are done on your body as an astronaut before you go up into space for a long duration mission is like few things that anybody has encountered, unless you're an astronaut. So their bodies are put through the ringer before they're cleared to fly.
So have you heard anything, Kristen? Have you heard anything from the community? What is top of mind as we talk about who it could be? It doesn't, honestly, almost doesn't, not that it doesn't matter who it could be. It's really the medical condition that I'm most curious about as we look to explore further and further into space, as we have all these ideas, including going back to the moon. If we have Elon Musk, his ideas for exploration, there's still a question about how the human body does in space. And we're only 25 years in the International Space Station. So there is the question of whether or not this is just something that could come up here on Earth. There's a condition. Dr. Polk said there needs to be more diagnostic, that the person wasn't in an emergency situation, but they needed more diagnostic tools.
Sure.
And so, is it because of space, or is it just because you're a human being and some things happen? And so what in your conversation, what kind of comes up? What can you fill our audience in on?
Well, first, I just get this out of the way. I don't know who it is, and I don't know what the medical condition is, and I don't know anybody who does either. And that includes my mom. who, knows Mike Fink's family very well, and nobody knows.
Nobody knows. And by the way, there's been no reporting of it. I haven't seen anybody's even on the space blogs and stuff.
I wouldn't expect to, because there are NASA guards an astronaut's health with such strength. It is, if it dating back to the Mercury and the Gemini and Apollo days, there's a famous quote, I might butcher it, but nothing instills more fear in a fighter pilot, test pilot, astronaut's heart than the fear of having to go see a medical doctor and being told there's something wrong with you and you can't fly. Like, to them, that is more scary than sitting on top of a rocket and riding it into space. So that's kind of the culture that they're coming from. And NASA guards health secrets just stronger than anything I can think of. So I'm not surprised that we don't know who it is or what the condition is. In terms of how this astronaut that does have this medical condition, how that person is doing, we got to see the change of command ceremony on Monday, which was a 20-minute long video live stream of all the astronauts up at the space station doing the change of command. They all went around, they all talked, they were all in good spirits. And I'm looking and right. Everybody, like, who is it? Who's looking a little nauseous? Who's like, who's looking gray? Who doesn't look well? I couldn't spot it. I haven't seen any chatter on X or anywhere else where it's like, oh, that astronaut
didn't
look
well. But to spark
a
medical evacuation, you would think that it does have to be serious. It's serious enough for a diagnosis to be needed.
Well, and so that makes me think, I've obviously talked to a lot of people, but in particular my mom, who, in addition to being an astronaut, is also an emergency room physician. She's a doctor. And, we brainstorm, we play the game of, what could it be? And she believes the most likely possibility is that it is some kind of heart condition, right? Like an arrhythmia or an irregular heartbeat or something that just didn't sound right when they were, taking their pulse, perhaps in those pre-spacewalk checks. That's her best guess, but it is at this point just a guess.
Is there a reason why she would guess that?
It's one of the things, it's kind of process of elimination, right? If it were a virus or a sickness or someone who's just really ill, one, you could probably see that. Two, you could probably wait that out, right? If it was something like a stroke, you would probably have seen that as well. They probably wouldn't have done a video live stream if that had been the case. So, you just kind of go through the process of elimination of what these things could be. Is it like, did somebody feel a lump? Could it be a potential cancer diagnosis? But, one of the things you do before a spacewalk is you check an astronaut's pulse. So that is, I think, one of the reasons why that's her leading theory for why it would be maybe something heart related. And what can you do about that in space?
Right.
What if you're not going to put a stent in, you're not doing any operations or surgery in space. But if you have an astronaut who has a really irregular heartbeat, the only fix for that, or real sorts of monitoring of it, is if you get them back down to Earth. So,
and again, something
that conclusion,
something that could happen to someone here on Earth too, that suddenly there's a irregular heartbeat or something happens, and maybe you return to a regular rhythm, maybe you don't, and here it can be dangerous. It's right. There's a risk involved. So that'll be I wonder, do you think, and by the way, we are showing a picture so everyone knows who that cute baby is on the screen. It is Kristin with her mother. And we're going to talk a little bit more about her mother's background and this experience growing up as a daughter of two astronauts in a little bit. But I just could not show this photo because it's so amazing. And look at, you even have your own astronaut suit.
I know.
Kristin, how old are you in this photo?
I'm like 2. I'm the exact same age as my son. And he looks just like that. It's wild. We have the same hair. I've put him in that exact spacesuit. It's really cute.
Yeah, that's amazing. Was your mom going to space, coming back from space in this photo?
That was after she'd been to space, I think.
And she was the first mother in space.
First mother in space. She flew to space when I was 15 months old. She gave birth to me on a Friday and was back in the office for the morning meeting on Monday.
Oh my gosh.
3 days later. Isn't that
By the
wild?
way, we invited Kristen's mom to join us because I said, hey, if
Yes.
she's just hanging around having coffee, she should just join us. So
I
maybe
know.
someday in the future we'll get her.
She would love to.
That
And
would
she
be so
also,
fun.
the other wild thing is she was assigned to her first space flight when she was 8 months pregnant.
I love that.
Which, back then, this was like in 83, that was, they called both when George Abbey, who was the person who determined which astronauts were going to fly and on which missions, brought my mom in. One of the first questions he asked was also to my father, who was like, are you okay with this? With, my dad was also an astronaut. So he was like, are you okay with, your 8-month pregnant wife being assigned to a flight and going up to space?
I love that. It's teamwork, it's partnership, it's marriage in space or on Earth as well. Do you think we're going to find out what this medical condition is? Do you think NASA will come forward and give us a little more information, or do you think it'll always sort of be this top secret thing?
I think they'll leave it up to the astronaut, right? Like if he or she wants to come forward and say what it is or what it was, I think they're going to leave it up to them, would be my guess. But, they ruled out, it's not like an injury to that was another thing we thought was like, maybe you can't really drop a piece of equipment on your hand in 0G, right? But
no gravity
maybe,
thing, right?
Right. Maybe you got your arm pinched maybe it was some sort of actual physical injury, a broken bone or something of that nature. But that question was asked at the press conference last week and they said no. So again, that's one more reason why you just start to think, maybe this is heart related, or it could also be vision related. There's also a lot of changes to, think about your eyeballs in your head, right? And we have gravity, but what happens to your eyes and your vision when you're in microgravity and weightlessness? There are huge fluid shifts in your body and it impacts some astronauts' vision. So if there was something really serious about that, they were worried, about the astronauts' long-term vision and health. Maybe you bring them back down to Earth early. That's another possibility.
The undocking from the International Space Station is supposed to happen Wednesday evening, and the return is supposed to be in the early morning on Thursday. How dangerous is that trip back to Earth?
SpaceX, which is the company that builds and operates this spacecraft that will return these astronauts back to Earth, the Crew Dragon, as it's called. They have made this return to Earth so routine and look so easy. But I don't think you can ever look past. It's so easy to get lulled into a false sense of complacency, right? They've done this so many times now. They make it so routine. They make it look so easy. But the reality is you are re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that spacecraft is experiencing temperatures that are half as hot as the surface of the sun. And bad things have happened to astronauts on re-entry during the shuttle program. So it is arguably, aside from launch, the most dangerous and dynamic part of the entire mission. So SpaceX makes it look easy. They've never had an issue, but it's still re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and it's still a splashdown into the ocean.
Which is also just sort of what do you think about what they're actually doing, where they're landing, how they're being collected? It is quite miraculous. You said that bad things have happened to astronauts. What are some of the risks when they come back, and what has been some of the repercussions of that?
Columbia, the tragedy of what happened to Space Shuttle Columbia back in 2003, when those astronauts aboard the space shuttle were re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. A piece of foam on launch had fallen off and dinged the heat shield on the underbelly of the shuttle and caused a hole in those protective tiles that protect the spacecraft and the astronauts from those really high temperatures on reentry. And it burned up when it hit that friction of the Earth's atmosphere and disintegrated over Texas and huge parts of the United States. And all of those astronauts were killed. And it was an accident that could have been avoided. And to me, one of the most haunting things about all of spaceflight is that people on the ground knew what had happened with the foam. They knew that it was a risk, that the heat shield had been badly damaged. And yet the decision was made not to tell the crew, not to tell the astronauts that there was this concern in mission control about their safety. And they could have at least known, said goodbye to their families, and they were not afforded that opportunity. So that's what I think about every time a spacecraft re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
You know, we know these stories. They're part of the cultural awareness, but hearing it told that way from you now brings us right back to that moment to understand, because you're right. It feels very methodic. Going up to space, coming back down, it feels that way. That's the expectation. No one expects and hopefully nothing does happen, but it is understanding the risk. So we can also properly honor those who are taking the risk and the teams behind them that are supporting them, so that we have a better understanding of that. Did NASA change any policies after that astronauts have to be made aware of, the potential risk? Like, for example, this person with this medical condition, I would assume that my assumption would be, well, if there was any reason why this medical condition could be an issue coming back to Earth, I would assume there was a conversation about that. But sometimes things the government surprise you, that there's not conversations like the one that you're mentioning.
Yeah. Huge changes were made after Challenger, and huge changes were made to NASA's safety culture after Columbia. I actually don't know if that particular piece of, if an astronaut's life is in danger and the people on the ground know it, are they required to tell the astronaut in orbit? I don't know if that, I know there have been conversations about that. I don't know if it's like written into, not law, but the proper protocol, right? But in terms of, did this astronaut that suffered from this current medical condition, I know that they were in close consultations with doctors on the ground, and with even, all the way up to the NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, and his team. They were in close consultations with, that's how high up this went. This was not just a Johnson Space Center mission control thing. This went all the way up to the NASA administrator. I was super impressed that he came out and held a press conference right there to squash any potential rumors from getting out, right? Like in the past, I can see worlds where that would have never happened, where NASA would not have said something publicly. They would have just put out statements and let all these questions sort of foster rumors and gossip. So I was really encouraged to see this level of transparency from the new NASA administrator coming out and just holding this press conference right off the bat, And
Let me ask you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You can
I think
finish your
he was
thought there.
asked a question. I think he was asked a question like, did this astronaut want to come back to space? Or did he want to come back to Earth, right? Because one other thing we haven't talked about is, I know if this were my dad, if my dad suffered from some kind of medical condition in space and he was the reason that his crew had to come back early, he would have rather died than be the reason that brought a crew home early. Like, that is just who my dad is. And a lot of astronauts are. So it's a fair question. I can't remember. I don't think he fully answered that question. I think he said, the astronaut was good with whatever the NASA leadership
with the team
decided.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. So we heard a little bit about Mike Fink's water skiing skills and his amazing career at NASA. I don't know too much about, and I don't mean to not pronounce her name correctly. Zena Cardman.
Zena Cardman.
What do we know about Zena? Now, there's a Japanese astronaut, there's a Russian astronaut, so it could be one of them. But for our American audience, predominantly American audience, these are our two NASA astronauts. So,
correct.
And NASA was commenting on this, although I would expect they would probably comment on it anyways, but maybe you have some insight to that, Kristen, too. So what do we know about Xena?
So Xena is just an incredibly smart, sharp, newer astronaut. This was her first mission. This was the first time that she's ever flown to space. First time she's ever been up to the International Space Station. She's very young, which I think is one of the reasons why people don't think that this is her, that she's the one that suffered from some kind of medical condition. She's just a lot younger than all the other astronauts are up there. And I'm now, in my 40s, and I'm fully aware that the older you get, the more medical problems and conditions you have. So just kind of by process of elimination, if I had to bet, I would say it's least likely that it's her. But one thing that we haven't talked about is just both Xena and Mike Fink have been through so much personally to get to this moment. Xena was bumped off her original flight that she was assigned to for Butch and Sunny. Remember those two astronauts that were stuck in space?
Yes.
They weren't really stuck in space, but like stuck in space.
But they were kind of stuck in space. Yes.
They were up there for longer than intended, however you want to phrase it. But she was pulled from the spacecraft that launched to bring Butch and Sunny home so that they could have seats for them. And they weren't going to fly home on their Boeing Starliner spacecraft, which had all those issues. So imagine she was very gracious, and she came out and said, she completely understood it and said all the right things. But I mean, I just know how I would feel if I were in that situation and be like, man, like you're weeks away from your first space flight and you get pulled. Like what a punch in the guts,
Yes.
And Mike Fink was also supposed to be the original, I think he was either the original commander or the original pilot for that first Boeing Starliner test flight. And he was pulled off it because of all the delays and other factors that went into it. But he's been with NASA forever, and he hasn't flown in space in forever because he was tied up in all that Boeing Starliner stuff and didn't get to fly. So I just think I'm grateful that these two astronauts, Xena and Mike, have had the length of mission that they've had. But I can see why Mike Fink described this as bittersweet. Their mission is being cut short by a few weeks because of this. So it is only a few weeks, but these are two people who've really, been through a lot in terms of spaceflight assignments. And so I hate to see their mission get cut short.
Absolutely. I could not imagine that news. And at the same time, we have a lot of exciting other news coming from NASA. So we're going to have a lot to watch over the next few weeks. This is the most immediate. And what happens, Kristen, when the astronauts land? So there's the splashdown. Like, where do they go after that? And what happens to them?
So they will splash down. Their spacecraft will splash down beneath big parachutes. And they will have the SpaceX recovery team will come in a big boat. The spacecraft will be lifted out of the water on like a crane and put on the boat. And then the astronauts will be taken out in stretchers. And that is, you're going to see that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to think, oh, this is because this is a medical evacuation and one of these astronauts is really sick. But that is standard operating procedure for all missions because you've been in zero gravity. And now not only are you on Earth, but you're on the water, and there's waves and it's hard to get your balance anyway. And you've been up in space for like 6 months. So all the astronauts, when you're on these longer duration missions, are typically helped out in like a wheelchair or a stretcher or, something of that nature.
And do they go back and get medically evaluated immediately?
They do on the boat. There is a medical evaluation center on the boat. There was one mission where somebody in the crew, and I believe a few members of the crew, were all taken to a hospital immediately after. And we still don't know why that was, to the best of my knowledge. But so there are options from the boat. There are options. If everything's fine, you go back to the Johnson Space Center, typically Ellington Field, where the families will meet you and greet you, and you get to spend some time with your family for a bit. And then you go in for medical tests and medical checks, because long duration spaceflight takes a tremendous toll on your body. But in this situation, will one of these astronauts be taken straight to a hospital for intensive checks and tests? Certainly sounds that way.
And how long does that medical evaluation typically last? And does your mom tell you how long it took her to kind of get to where she was standing and walking normally? Was it just a couple hours, or did it take longer than that?
So my mom did a 10-day mission. These astronauts are coming back from a long duration mission, multiple months in space. My mom said, excuse me, my mom said that it felt like she was a gorilla when she landed back on Earth, just trying to move your limbs again. Like she was picking up your legs was just unbelievably difficult to do. She was so afraid that, and this is a common thing that NASA astronauts say, but you used to have to walk out of the shuttle, walk downstairs, and because it landed like an airplane. And so you would exit the space shuttle like you would an airplane through these stairs. And they were like, the degree of difficulty of going from weightlessness to walking downstairs and clutching this handrail while there are cameras on you and you're trying not to fall down. They were like, that's one of the hardest parts of being an astronaut. She, for those types of missions, for her, it was a few hours. For these astronauts, it's more time intensive. It's a few days. But I believe they can, depending on the situation, they get to spend some family time, but then they have to go back to work and do some debriefs and more intensive medical checks.
Yeah, thinking about that reentry in so many different ways, including the landing, but then just back to normal life, and back to the swing of things after you've been at the International Space Station. I can't believe what that adjustment is probably like. I have a couple of final questions for you, and I encourage our audience, if they have our live audience, if anyone has any questions for you as well, we'd love to add those. I want to show everyone a picture of your mom and dad and you from a few years ago. Not that long ago, Kristen. Recent
years ago.
It's as a 2-year-old. Another great photo. I was wondering if your mom was also a supermodel, because she looks like one in all of these photos. Side note, she's this amazingly beautiful woman for those listening on podcasts, and an astronaut and a mom. What an incredible career. Did you ever flirt with the idea of becoming an astronaut yourself, or was it immediate to you that maybe wasn't your calling?
I think that there's something about everybody telling you your entire life, asking you this question, oh, are you going to be an astronaut too when you grow up? Are you going to be an astronaut too? With not just one, but two parents as astronauts. Man, it was just, not only did everybody ask that question, President Reagan actually asked my mom that question when she was in space. And it was a video that that's followed me around my whole life. There was something about, call it being a little rebellious. I don't know. There was something about there was something about me feeling like that was expected of me that made me want to do something else. But I always felt tremendous pressure to do something great. I don't know what great was, define great. In my head, that's kind of living life to the fullest and going on these big grand adventures to space or around the world as a journalist. But it was never, as I've learned later in life, it was never a pressure that my parents put on me. It was a pressure that I just kind of put on myself. And it's only been, really within the last 7 years when I fully made the jump to covering space full time, where it was man, this is my calling. I forget about all that. This is just what I want to do. This is my passion. This feels like home. So now as an adult, I do think about it. But for the first half of my life, I never did.
Listen, there still could be the opportunity. I mean, you have no idea where these reporting trips are going to take you. And that's what's so amazing about being a journalist, and why we have to encourage young people to explore journalism, because it can take you so many amazing places and get you to speak to so many amazing people. We do have some families that are watching live, Kristen, and I love the children because they get directly to the point that everybody is asking.
Totally.
Eslin, age 8, is wondering if there is anything that lives in space. I don't know if that's a reference to aliens or anything else. It could be something else. But that's the question. Does anything live in space? And does it really take 3 days to get to the moon? Which actually leads us to another big news story.
Yeah.
So take that question however you'd like.
What is his name?
Eslin.
Okay, Eslin. Does anything live in space? Well,
does anything live in space?
Astronauts, humans, have been living in space for the last 25 years. But I know that's not what you're really asking. Is there other life in this universe? Statistically, personally, I think yes, even though we haven't found it yet. I mean, there's so many incredible telescopes, the Webb telescope, Hubble telescope, that are out there trying to answer that very question. But another topic that I've become very passionate about lately is UFOs, extraterrestrial life. Is it out there? Is it real? I don't have the answer to that. Neither do my parents. Neither does anybody that I've ever spoken to that's gone to space. But what I do know is that the US government and the Pentagon have come out and said that there are things in the skies that the US government cannot explain, that move in ways that defy the laws of physics and just our understanding of life and Earth itself. So what is that? Why are we not all talking about that? Why is that not like front page headline news all the time, everywhere? I'll never understand.
Well, it brought you to a hearing on Capitol Hill. There has been some kind of renewed energy around it. About this idea, like, what are these unknown objects? And we did have that very strange situation with the balloon from China that was flying over the surveillance balloon, the spy balloon. I hate to take everyone back a few years ago, but that was all just this idea that there's this whole part of the planet that is not really policed, and we don't necessarily know exactly what that's going to look like, business-wise or otherwise. What was the most interesting thing? Because you did do some interviews regarding, I hate to say aliens, but unknown objects.
The technical term is non-human intelligence now.
Thank you. I'm like, I feel like that could apply to a lot of things. So besides aliens.
It really could.
So was there anything interesting, like a little nugget that you were like, not whether or not that form of life exists, but something that was like, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before.
I mean, to me, the moment that just hooked me into this whole topic was a former U.S. intelligence officer who testified before Congress that he was aware of people who had come into contact with non-human intelligence, and that not only did the U.S. government have these crafts, but that they were reverse engineering the crafts, and that they had the phrase that was used was non-human biologics. And this is a phrase that was used under oath on Capitol Hill in July of 2023. And for me, that was just the moment when I was like, this is not a kook. This is not a crazy guy. This is someone who has a long history in the U.S. intelligence community. You don't get those types of security clearances without having an unbelievable amount of, security checks and background checks and mental health checks. So I always go back to that. David Grush, July 2023 was the moment for me.
And there's been a big question about congressional oversight, by the way, because that's our representatives are supposed to have oversight and access to certain things. And so there's been a little bit of a rub there with our representatives, not a little bit of, wait a minute, the American people need to have access to some of this.
Yeah.
And then there's also the question of what's top secret and classified. And it allows our imaginations to run wild. That's for sure. So we'll just leave an opening for that next development that'll surely happen in 2026 is, as we thought it was going to be a slow news year, and it's not. Esla was asking about the moon, and that brings us actually to the Artemis mission, which is coming up in just like 3 weeks. This is a sudden, again, new announcement. We're going back to the moon, not to walk, but we're going right around it, Kristen. So tell us about, does it take 3 days to get to the moon? And what are we doing with Artemis? Why does that matter?
It does. It takes 3.5 days to get to the moon because it's so far away. The Artemis program is, Artemis is the twin sister to Apollo in Greek mythology. So everybody knows what the Apollo program was. The first time that man walked on the moon. This is going to be the first time that a woman walks on the moon. And the Artemis program is designed to leave more than just flags and footprints, right? Like the Apollo astronauts, they planted a flag, they walked around, they played golf, they collected some rocks, and then they were gone for 50 years, right? That's a whole nother podcast. But Artemis is designed to ultimately build a base on the moon, a sustained human presence on the moon, just like they're doing now up at the International Space Station. And so Artemis 2 is the first time that astronauts have been back to the moon, just orbiting the moon, not landing on the moon, since the end of the Apollo program in 1972. That rocket is rolling out to the launch pad on Saturday. I'm flying down tomorrow to be there. And then it should launch. First launch window opens February 6th. But it could really launch at any point between, there's launch windows in February, March, and April. So we'll see which one we get.
And so this rocket will get, will the rocket get, I don't know enough about this topic. I'm like, the rocket will take the people, but the rocket will take does the rocket stay with the space capsule or whatever's flying around the moon the whole time? How does it come back to Earth? Like, tell me that. There's all these parts that split apart in other missions. Kristen, it gets very confusing for me. So please walk us through that.
I love having a model. I literally just ordered a model of this rocket. I don't have it here, but so the way to think of it is there's a booster and a capsule, right? The booster is the big thing, that launches the astronauts and the capsule into space. That is called the SLS rocket. On top of that is the Orion spacecraft or the Orion capsule. That's what the 4-person crew is sitting inside. So the booster launches it into space, and then once it gets into orbit or shortly before, the two separate. And so the booster is fully expendable, not reusable. It falls back to Earth, lands in the ocean, becomes a coral reef in a generous recounting of events. And the Orion spacecraft goes on it will orbit the Earth once, or maybe more than once. Don't quote me on that, but it'll orbit the Earth to make sure that all systems are functioning properly. And then it will begin its journey to the moon and orbit the moon. And it'll be the furthest that any humans have ever traveled from Earth.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll just go around the moon and then just come back?
They'll orbit the moon, test out, this is a test flight. This is the first time that any people have been inside this spacecraft ever. I'd never orbited the Earth. It's now, now they're going to do, there's a bunch of like communications checks and system checks that they have to do to prepare for Artemis 3. And that is scheduled for late 2028, just in time for the end of President Trump's second term. And if that is a very tight schedule and time frame, but it could happen. And the goal of that is to, same architecture, SLS rocket, Orion capsule, only there, the astronauts are going to transfer to another vehicle, a lunar lander, TBD on what that is. And then they will descend to the lunar surface, spend some time there, go back up to the Orion spacecraft, and then go back to Earth.
Wow. I mean, that's going to be an incredible, another incredible story to witness. Is there any indication that Russia or China could beat us there in this time frame?
Yeah. It's totally possible. Some might say probable. Russia's no longer the primary threat to the United States in space, which was obviously our first the United States' first rival, in the first Cold War and the first space race. It's China now. And China has the benefit of no term limits, no change in administration, no change in funding, no change in mission or objectives. Like, they have been laser focused on the moon for a very long time. And they are on pace as of this moment to potentially beat the United States back to the moon, boots on the moon. And I say this, it was the former NASA administrator, Jim Bridenstine, who testified, under oath before Congress a few months ago. And he said he thinks it's, we now have to consider the possibility that there's a very good chance that China beats the United States back to the moon.
It's very interesting. What do you think would be the implication of that? Would that somehow block us from going back to the moon, or? ownership of the moon, or I don't even know what to think.
Potentially all of the above. I mean, another former NASA administrator, the Florida Senator Bill Nelson, he says, what's stopping them from once they land on the lunar South Pole, which is where everybody wants to land because that's where they believe water is. And then you can use that water to turn it into water for the astronauts or rocket fuel to go to Mars someday. So it's a very, resource rich part of the moon that everybody wants. So if China lands there first, as Bill Nelson used to always say, what's stopping them from claiming that part of the moon and just saying, this is ours, just like the South China Sea is ours, and you guys can't come over here. Would they do it? Who knows? But, Jenna, I think it's more of a symbolic loss, like what will happen, I think, if this were to be how this plays out is, nobody pays any attention to this. It's space. There's a ton of troubles here on Earth that everybody's focused on, and rightfully so. And then all of a sudden people are going to wake up one day and be like, oh my gosh, China's on the moon and they beat NASA astronauts back there. Like, how did this happen? So,
and that would bring up a lot more conversation about what else they could beat us to. So definitely a story to watch. I have two quick final questions for you. One's a little bit less philosophical than another one. So I'll leave the philosophical one for the end. You did the broadcast for Blue Origin launch into space. If you were given the opportunity to jump on one of those launches, any of them, like that could be coming, would you take that chance? Would you go for it?
I would wait until my kids were a little bit older. I have a 2-year-old. And look, when my mom went into space, she was doing something on behalf of her country. It was a promise she had made to NASA and the US government before I was ever born. And I get her desire to honor that commitment to her country. If I were to go to space right now, it would strictly be as a tourist for my own personal sightseeing, and I'd love to go. Like, I would love to go. I really just want to see Earth from space. That's the biggest draw for me. But I would just wait a little bit until my kids are a bit older.
It's a very interesting answer. Do you ever hold that over your mom and say, you know what? Remember that time you left me behind?
Remember that time you left me
for
on
10
Earth?
days?
Yeah, when I was 15 months old. Thanks, Mom.
I remember it, Mom. This is where all my issues come from. Yeah.
We joke about it all the time. And there's a really great documentary coming out called Once Upon a Time in Space. It aired in the UK a few months ago. It's coming to PBS later this year. And it was just a very skillful and intelligent director. And we did these long, 8-hour interviews, and he asked all these questions that you're asking. Like,
good. So you're warmed up.
Your mom was selfish for going into space and leaving you behind on Earth. And
would they ask the dad that? Would they ask the dad that? Did he ask the dad yet? That's what I'm curious about.
That's what he asked my mom this. And that's what my mom said. My mom said, I heard all this criticism back then, but it was like, you're just asking the mom that. You're not asking the dad, right?
Yeah.
But she had, mean tweets wasn't it like one of mean tweets where you read mean tweets about yourself? She had to do that in this documentary, read some of the mean things that people were saying about her for leaving her baby behind on Earth. So, we talk about it, we joke about it. I'm just glad she got home safe and that I'm blissfully I don't remember any of it.
Yeah.
Right? I was 14, 15 months old. I got to play with grandma for a week. It was great.
Yeah. Some parents go to Hawaii. She went to space. Right. What are you going to do? Okay. Here's the philosophical question. But I am curious what your thoughts are on this. You used to, in your previous life as a White House correspondent, be really involved in the day-to-day of news. And I know for our audience, the avalanche of news can be overwhelming. It can be aggravating. It's one of the problems that we're trying to solve with Smarter News, so that saying current still feels good. But you used to be really involved in that every single day, everything that was happening right in front of you. And space is this new frontier where you're able to focus on what's coming next in something that's bigger than Earth. And I'm wondering how that has impacted the way that you think about current events or the sort of framework that you put around some of the stories that are in front of us. Because thinking about a medical evacuation in space gives you some perspective for some other things that are happening in the immediate, I would imagine. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'd be curious to hear your take on this too, but I feel like this has been like a slow kind of deprogramming, or I have just lived and breathed 24/7. Like my definition of news has been so limited to what's breaking. How can I break a story? How can you advance it? And this past year, when I've had the opportunity to step away from it and be more creative and think about what I want my company and my YouTube channel to be, I've constantly had to remind myself that the definition of news is broader than the definition that I have been used to for the last 15, 20 years. And I literally have to remind myself of that every day, because the instinct to cover something immediately or live as it's happening is so strong. And I have to remind myself that that's not necessarily what I do now. Like sometimes it is, but I believe that space suffers from a lack of inspirational storytelling that's able to really connect with people, because space is such an ambiguous thing. Like we all live in cities now. There's light pollution. You can't see the planets and stars like our ancestors once did. We've all been alive since we've been a spacefaring species. We all take it for granted. And so what I try to do is make space exciting, interesting, kind of like give it a big dose of wonder and remind people just how incredible the universe is. And that, I think, in order to do that, I don't necessarily have to be doing day-to-day news like I once did. So I'm like, it's a definition that is constantly changing for me.
Yes, that's such an interesting perspective. That muscle memory to go back to the 24-hour news and to get back into that posture is very difficult to unwind. And yet, what it sounds like you're talking about is very similar to what provoked me and motivated me and continues to inspire me to work in this space, which is that news and this sort of storytelling is about a service to the public. It's not about seeing yourself on television or on a screen or being part of like kind of like elite celebrity class of journalists that have become that way. Listen, some of the stuff is fun, don't get me wrong, but it's really what's at the core of it is the service to the people who are living their best lives. And we're here to keep them current on the other things that are happening so that they could continue to live their best lives and make whatever decisions that they want to make. So it's always coming back to that service. Like, wait, is this what people really need? And do they need this right now? And am I really serving them the best way? Those are some big, topics of contemplation for me at Smarter News. But I love what you're saying about space, which is true. It's that idea of not being able to gaze into a dark night sky and have that wonder, which is so absent from some of our conversations, is painful. And we need to regain that part of our humanity. It's really important. It makes us human. We have this big sky, to look up to. So, and to wonder about what lies beyond in the endless void.
In the endless void. And, Jenna, I think news, mainstream news, legacy news, whatever you want to call it, is so focused on like wanting to answer something, wanting to resolve something. And a lot of stories in space and in life, but especially space, there is no answer. Like we don't know if there's other life. And I kind of like playing in the unknown and the questions more. And that's just not what a lot of like mainstream news wants right now.
We just talked about this actually at Smarter News, is the difference between explaining and reporting. And that reporting can include a lot of things, context, perspective, facts, but you can't always explain everything. And that's not necessarily what we've been now engineered to want, which is answers, immediate answers, and what's happening and to know exactly how I feel about something right away. So, well, it's, we're sisters in this process, Kristen.
Well,
onwards.
And Jenna,
okay.
I just have to say, since this is like really my first time on your show, what badass you are and what an inspiration you were to me all those years ago when, for those that don't remember, Jenna was a big time anchor on Fox News. She really was. She was a huge anchor on Fox News. I was a correspondent in the DC bureau, and I used to go on her show all the time. And you were somebody that I looked up to and admired because you spoke in a way that was so real and not manufactured, like a lot of, not manufactured, but you spoke in a way that just felt so real and authentic and genuine that really just cut through all of the masks that so many of us feel like we have to wear on TV. And when you took this leap and you made this jump, I was blown away. And you walked away from a job that most people, I don't think, would walk away from because you had a dream and a belief in what you're doing right now. And to see you be one of the first to really make this jump and transition from, a huge mainstream TV news career to a successful independent journalist, it has just been so impressive and inspiring to watch. And I follow in your footsteps. So,
well, thank you. You did make me tear up. I mean, it's fun to be able to talk about the past. Sometimes there's a grief process in walking away from something that you dreamed of, which was to be a working journalist. Totally. And that grief process is real. It's ongoing. It's not like you just kind of one day wake up and you're over it. It's an ongoing process. And I think as I get older, I think about what an important time in my career that was. At that exact moment, there were two forks in the road. I mean, literally. And it was such a pivotal decision. And I knew it at the time, and I knew what was right, and I knew what had integrity. And those are moments that you can't manufacture in your life. You have to answer those moments. And sometimes you answer them right, and sometimes you don't. I do believe I answered this correctly, but that doesn't mean it wasn't painful, and it doesn't mean that it hasn't had a lot of repercussions personally, professionally, in all sorts of ways that I did not anticipate and could not anticipate. So hearing that makes me feel so good. And I appreciate that. One of I see in corporate America for women, and I certainly experienced it, is that I always wanted to hope that I could be inspiring to some of the younger women that were part of the network. And I, sometimes could do that in person and sometimes could not. So that means a lot to me, Kristen.
You totally inspired me. And I relate so much to what I remember, like getting my dream job, becoming a White House correspondent and getting there and being like, this is it. Like, this should feel more. This is like what I've worked weekends and holidays for and like clawed to get to. And I just remember feeling such disappointment that like I'd been wrong about my dream for me, like that I had dreamed of this. And then once I got it, I was like, oh shit, sorry if I,
sorry to the 8-year-olds out there.
Maybe this isn't my dream after all, and coming to terms with that took years.
Yeah.
It took years, and I've had to give myself permission to allow my dreams to grow and be really honest with myself that the dreams that I had as a kid may not be the same dreams that are not the same dreams that adult Kristen has.
Yes. And that these dreams can actually be bigger and more magical, and that you don't lose that in your childhood, that they actually can grow. Well, this sounds like the basis for another podcast about mainstream media and
recovering
and the trauma that comes from it. I see a very successful potential YouTube
really
video
good.
and series on that. And you know what, Kristen, to be honest with you, I have not talked a lot about the past because I felt like when I left news, it was there were a myriad of different reasons that left that sort of news, that I didn't want any anger or frustration that I had from that process to bleed into Smarter News, because the audience would feel it. And that negativity or that bitterness or that revenge feeling, that's not what this is about. It's about a service. Like, what is journalism about? It's about a service. Like, how do you return it to a service and make it work for people? And what is that? It has to be a solution to a problem. It can't be a platform for complaints. And so now I'm almost 10 years out of traditional media.
Wow.
And which is wild. And I finally feel like I can start putting cohesive thoughts together that, because I've had a hard time telling my own story about it, because there were so many times that were very difficult, and it's much easier to pour yourself into work So, and I believe in what I'm doing. And that's where the energy needed to go.
Sure.
Not to those other places, because they already had enough energy. So I really want our audience to continue to know that the solution exists. And when it's the right time, I think talking about some of that is important, because it underscores why what we're doing matters, and why independent journalism is important, but why journalism matters too. And that it can't be a forgotten craft. It has to be something that's practiced, and that there's younger people doing it, and that they're doing a good job. And,
that's the other thing I love about you is you believe, you're so old school in that, like, you believe in journalism with a capital J. And like, I'm the same. I went to journalism school. Like, I believe that, I know this is not reality, but in my heart, journalism is still like this little golden fairy, a little angel with a halo. And it is like pristine and can't be tainted by, bias, or like, I believe there is a way to do good, pure journalism. I still believe in it. I realize maybe nobody or fewer people want to watch it nowadays, but like, I believe in my core in journalism with a capital J, and you embody that and live that on Smarter News.
I'm going to have that like little golden fairy imagery. But I do love that. Old school is a new school. And when there's a crisis, people do turn back to what really matters, which is the basics. But I didn't, by the way, start out that way. I just wanted to do good work. I was just, when I went to journalism school, the whole time I was there, they just told you were not going to get a job or earn enough to have a good life. That was the pep talk. It was
kind of shocking,
at graduate school, which is like, guess what? You're going to get your master's and then you're never going to work. So I just wanted to have a job. Like, that was the main thing. And then suddenly, obviously, with the news changing, more of these foundational thoughts come up. My grandfather was a war correspondent in the Associated Press. And that's why I do believe in a little family background. Like, I do feel like I never got to talk to him a lot about his adventures, but I just feel like it's in your soul,
it's in you.
And you're trying to express it. And so that's what we're all trying to do with our stories, whatever that is. So, all right, to be continued, Kristin. I've taken enough of your time, and there's a big news story tonight, so I don't want to keep you. I want everyone to know where they can find you at The Endless Void. The Endless Void Studios is something that we want to keep an eye on for sure. That is the larger company, but the Endless Void YouTube channel has a lot of Kristin's amazing adventures, and you definitely should go check it out. Whether you're interested in
thanks, Jenna,
aliens or launches into space.
A lot of alien content, a lot of space exploration content. We got a bit of both.
But it's responsible alien content.
Responsible alien content. Yes, it is. It is.
We can put that as your tagline. Endless Void plus responsible alien content.
Responsible alien content.
I think we just did it. We solved that. Okay, well, that's good. Well, we'll be in touch, Kristin. We have a lot to talk about and future projects that we're going to have to explore clearly.
Yes.
And I look forward to hearing more about your adventures ahead, including with Artemis. So I'll be watching that closely. But thank you so much for your time today. It's great to spend this time together.
Fun.
And thank you to everyone for joining us as well. We'll have more quick, concise, nonpartisan information always at smarternews.com. And we'll be following all the news so that you can live your own best story. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.